Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Right now, sitting in your living room, there is a device.
Like a router or something.
Yeah, maybe a generic smart webcam pointing at your driveway, or that Wi-Fi router blinking quietly on your desk. And it might have secretly participated in a massive cyber attack against the United States Department of Defense.
It's wild to think about. You wouldn't have noticed a thing.
No, exactly. Your streaming video worked fine. Your, video calls didn't drop. But behind the scenes, the actual silicon inside your home was weaponized.
It really is the ultimate invisible threat. I mean, we are so culturally conditioned to look for obvious cinematic dangers when we think of international conflict, right?
Like hackers in hoodies or something.
Right, or we look for state-of-the-art server farms hidden in underground bunkers or specialized military units. We simply do not look at our household appliances as instruments of global disruption.
Which is exactly why we are jumping into this today. We know you tune into this deep dive because you want to get past the superficial headlines, fluff-free, and understand the actual mechanics of the stories shaping our infrastructure. So today, our sole source is this really remarkable document. It's an official U.S. Department of Justice press release straight out of the District of Alaska, and it's dated exactly today, March 19, 2026.
And it is a dense document. It details a synchronized, multinational disruption of an unprecedented scale, basically mapping out how the seemingly harmless devices in our homes were grouped together to create, well, a weapon of mass digital disruption.
Yeah, so the mission for this deep dive is to unpack this operation.
Yeah.
We're going to look at how 4 of the world's largest Internet of Things botnets were built, how they bypassed the firewalls we all assume keep us safe.
And the massive coalition that had to stop them.
Right. This decentralized coalition of government and private tech entities that had to step in to cut the head off the snake. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the sheer scale of what the Justice Department was facing here.
The numbers are staggering.
They really are. They announced the disruption of 4 massive botnets. So we have Isuru, Kimwolf, Jackskid, and Mossad. And by March 2026, the administrators behind these networks had hijacked over 3 million devices worldwide.
3 million?
Yeah, with hundreds of thousands of those infected nodes located right here in the United States.
And the firepower generated by linking those 3 million devices together is, it's hard to even comprehend. The court documents revealed these botnets were responsible for distributed denial-of-service attacks, or DDoS attacks, measuring up to 30 terabits per second.
Okay, I really want to focus on that number, 30 terabits per second, because I think the term DDoS gets thrown around so often that we kind of lose perspective on what it actually means at the hardware level.
Oh, absolutely. People just think it means a website goes down.
Right. Assuming, the basic mechanics of a DDoS attack, flooding a target server with junk traffic so legitimate requests get dropped, the scale of 30 terabits fundamentally changes the nature of the threat.
It does.
Like, if a standard DDoS attack is like sending 1,000 fake delivery drivers to a restaurant's host stand at the same time so no real customers can get a table.
Right, a traffic jam.
Yeah, but 30 terabits per second isn't just a crowded lobby. It's like teleporting the entire population of a massive city into a single phone booth instantly.
That is a perfect analogy. It completely breaks the system.
Exactly. At 30 terabits, it's not the host stand that fails. The concrete collapses. The physical highway system is just crushed.
What's fascinating here is that distinction when you're analyzing this DOJ release. At 30 terabits per second, we are no longer talking about simply exhausting a target server's processing capacity or, filling up a software connection queue.
It's physical.
Yes. The sheer physical volume of data instantly crushes the underlying transit infrastructure. It overwhelms the actual fiber optic pipes and the Tier 1 provider links leading to the data center.
Wow.
The physical hardware routers that direct internet traffic literally cannot process the headers of the incoming packets fast enough. So their memory buffers overflow, and the hardware simply snaps under the pressure,
causing cascading failures across the whole network.
Exactly.
So the target doesn't even get a chance to filter the bad traffic from the good because the physical pipe leading to their building is choked entirely. But here's where it gets really interesting and where I have to push back a bit on the mechanics of this.
Okay.
To generate 30 terabits of data, you need immense processing power. I look at my $20 baby monitor, and it barely has enough computing power to stream a grainy video to my phone. How on earth does a network of cheap webcams generate enough force to overwhelm enterprise-grade transit links?
Well, It's a matter of aggregate automation. A DDoS node doesn't need to run complex encryption algorithms or heavy computational tasks. It only needs to do one incredibly simple thing.
Which is?
Send a continuous stream of tiny, repetitive data requests. Your webcam might only have the processing power to send a few megabits of junk data per second.
Barely a trickle.
Right. But when you multiply that by 3 million devices and you synchronize them to fire at the exact same millisecond...
You get that 30 terabit wave.
Precisely. They are utilizing the stripped-down Linux operating systems inside these Internet of Things, or IoT devices. These appliances have just enough RAM to run a basic script. They are connected to high-speed internet constantly, and historically, they ship with terrible security.
Okay, but what about the firewall?
Okay.
Because the DOJ release highlights this very specific, terrifying detail. It notes that two of these botnets, Kimwolf and Jackskid, achieved their scale by targeting devices that are traditionally firewalled from the rest of the internet. Most people assume that if their smart TV or webcam is sitting behind their home router, it's invisible to the outside world. How are international operators bypassing that perimeter without the homeowner, actively downloading malware?
Well, they aren't trying to brute force their way through the firewall. They're essentially walking through a side door that the hardware manufacturer deliberately left propped open for convenience.
The side door.
Yeah. The administrators of Kimwolf and Jackskid specifically look to exploit protocols like UPnP or Universal Plug and Play.
Oh, UPnP. That's the protocol that makes it so when I plug in my gaming console, it automatically configures my network so I can play online without having to log into my router dashboard.
Exactly. It was designed for frictionless consumer setup. But the fundamental flaw of UPnP is that it inherently trusts any request that comes from inside the local network.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So, if the botnet operators can find a single vulnerability on the edge of the network, maybe exploiting an unpatched zero-day flaw in the router's outdated firmware, they gain a foothold. And once they are inside, they use that trusted position to scan the internal network for every other connected device.
And that is when they find the webcam.
Yes.
Yeah.
They find the webcam, the DVR, the smart thermostat. And because manufacturers often ship these devices with hard-coded default credentials.
Like username, admin, password.
Exactly. The automated script logs right in. It installs the botnet malware directly onto the device's memory, bypassing the firewall entirely.
That is wild. So the perimeter we all assume is protecting our homes has completely vanished. They punch right through the router, silently enslave the appliances, and the homeowner has absolutely no idea.
Because the webcam still works perfectly fine.
Right. It just quietly runs a hidden process in the background, waiting for a command from its new master. Which leads us to the business model behind all of this, because when we hear about massive cyber attacks, the stereotype is always a singular mastermind, right?
Launching the attack themselves for some ideological reason.
Exactly. But the DOJ describes something much more corporate here. They describe a cybercrime-as-a-service model.
It operates much more like a modern tech corporation than a lone wolf with a vendetta. The individuals who built Isuru, Kimwolf, Jackskid, and Mossad are not necessarily the ones launching the attacks. They are infrastructure providers.
Right. They're basically the digital landlords of a zombie appliance army. They spend their time accumulating these 3 million hijacked cameras, maintaining the network, and then they essentially rent out a 30 terabit wrecking ball by the hour to anyone with a credit card.
Or a cryptocurrency wallet, usually.
Yeah, exactly. It is a service. You log into a dark web portal that looks just like any legitimate software dashboard. You pick your tier, enter the IP address of your target, and the landlord's automated system pushes the button for you.
And that democratization of cyber warfare is exactly what makes this so dangerous. It significantly lowers the barrier to entry. You no longer need to know how to exploit UPnP protocols or write Linux malware.
You just need cash.
You just need to be willing to pay. And the volume of these rentals is staggering when you look at the command statistics provided in the court documents.
Oh, the numbers are unbelievable. According to the release, the Mossad botnet launched over 1,000 DDoS attack commands. The Kimwolf botnet issued more than 25,000 commands. Jackskid launched over 90,000 commands.
It just keeps going up.
And the Isuru botnet, it issued over 200,000 individual DDoS attack commands. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of times someone paid a fee to point this weapon at a target.
Over 200,000 individual attacks from a single botnet. And the primary motive here, as explicitly noted by the DOJ, is extortion.
Extortion.
Yes. Criminals rent the botnet, overwhelm a company's infrastructure, and then demand a ransom payment to call off the attack. The targets suffered tens of thousands of dollars in losses, and that's not just from the immediate downtime, but from the immense remediation expenses to restore their systems.
But knowing these operators are renting out this massive weapon by the hour creates an absolute jurisdictional nightmare, right? Like, when the weapon consists of 3 million webcams sitting in living rooms across the globe, local police can't do anything.
No, of course not.
A county sheriff in Ohio can't subpoena 1 million households across Brazil and Germany to confiscate their smart fridges. It requires a completely different mechanism of enforcement.
Exactly. The decentralized nature of Botnet is its primary defense mechanism. So to dismantle it, law enforcement has to mirror that global reach.
Right.
They cannot go door to door cleaning up infected appliances. They need a response that is just as distributed and coordinated as the threat itself.
And that response was triggered because these specific botnets crossed a very, very dangerous line. This wasn't just corporate extortion anymore. The press release explicitly states that the targets included IP addresses owned by the Department of Defense Information Network, the DoDIN.
That is a critical detail. The DoDIN is the globally interconnected set of information capabilities used to manage the U.S. military. When the DoDIN is targeted by a 30 terabit flood, the situation instantly elevates.
Yeah, from standard cybercrime to acute national security.
Right. It threatens military readiness.
Which explains the heavy hitters involved in the takedown. The Department of Defense Office of Inspector General's DCIS teamed up with the FBI Anchorage Field Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Alaska to execute the seizure warrants. But again, how do you actually arrest a cloud of 3 million devices?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you don't try to arrest the cloud. You decapitate the network. Every botnet requires a central brain to issue commands to the zombie devices. This is what the press release refers to as the command and control, or C2 infrastructure.
The central brain.
Yes. The millions of webcams are programmed to constantly reach out to a specific internet domain, asking for their next target assignment.
So the infected webcam wakes up, and it automatically reaches out to something like, I don't know, badguycommand.com to get its orders.
Precisely. And this is where the strategy comes into play. When the DOJ and its international partners execute seizure warrants, they aren't seizing physical computers in most cases. They are seizing the U.S. internet domains and virtual servers.
Ripping out the C2 infrastructure.
Right. But to do that effectively, they rely heavily on the private sector.
Yeah, I found the massive thank you list to the private sector in this release fascinating. It took Akamai, Amazon Web Services, Cloudflare, Google, Europol, and over a dozen other major tech entities working together. What exactly are companies like Cloudflare and AWS doing in this scenario?
Are they just handing over server logs?
Yeah, is that it?
No, they are doing much more than that. They provide the architectural visibility and the routing control required to execute a massive takedown. Because these companies own the physical infrastructure of the internet, law enforcement relies on them to implement what is known as a DNS sinkhole.
A sinkhole. Okay, walk me through how that actually works.
Sure. So when that infected webcam reaches out to badguycommand.com, it uses the global domain name system, DNS, to translate that domain name into a numerical IP address.
So it knows where to send the data.
Right. So law enforcement, armed with seizure warrants, works with the private tech companies managing those DNS registries to alter the records.
Wait, so when the infected camera asks the internet, where is the command server, the internet essentially lies to it.
Exactly. It's a massive traffic redirect. The DNS record points the camera to a dead-end IP address or a server controlled directly by law enforcement.
Wow.
The 3 million devices are still technically infected, sitting in people's homes, but their requests for orders fall into a void. They receive no targets, effectively neutralizing the entire 30 terabit weapon instantly.
It's a brilliant technical strategy. But sinkholing a domain only stops the current attack, right? Like, if you leave the human operators untouched, they can just register a new domain tomorrow.
Which is why the infrastructure seizure in the United States had to happen simultaneously with kinetic law enforcement actions targeting the human administrators in other jurisdictions. Sinkholing cuts the communication lines, but arresting the operators ensures the network cannot be resurrected.
And we see that perfectly synchronized in the document. While the U.S. was executing warrants on the virtual servers, international operations were striking simultaneously.
Right.
In Canada, the RCMP, the Ontario Provincial Police, and the Sûreté du Québec were targeting the human managers. Over in Germany, the Bundeskriminalamt, working with regional prosecutors, moved against targets there. And all of this was facilitated by Europol.
It functions as a synchronized decapitation strike. Warrants take time, right? Mutual legal assistance treaties between nations are traditionally slow. By coordinating through entities like Europol, they ensure the technical infrastructure in one jurisdiction is removed at the exact same moment the human operators are raided in another.
So they can't warn each other or move their crypto wallet.
Exactly. Or trigger automated failsafes.
The officials quoted in the release really emphasize how vital this borderless coordination is. U.S. Attorney Michael J. Hyman pointed out that this collaboration is the only way to bolster our collective ability to combat threats. Special Agent in Charge Kenneth DeChellis highlighted that cybercriminals deliberately use infrastructure beyond physical borders to shield themselves. And Special Agent Rebecca Day reiterated the shared commitment to protecting victims worldwide.
And you mentioned the geographic center of the U.S. operation earlier, the District of Alaska. That is a really compelling detail.
Yes, I really wanted to dig into that. Why is an operation defending the DoD network and seacoling servers alongside German police being run out of Anchorage? Looking at the related content section of the release, there is a clear pattern.
There is.
They list a 2025 crackdown on the wrapper-bot DDoS service. Then there was a major 2024 global crackdown on booter services, which are these DDoS operations masquerading as legitimate testing tools. That 2024 op seized 27 domains, and both of those were handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Alaska.
It reveals how law enforcement develops highly specialized institutional knowledge. Investigating a distributed botnet, securing the technical warrants for DNS sinkholes, coordinating international raids, it requires a very specific legal and technical framework.
They've built a playbook.
Exactly. The team in Alaska has clearly spent the last several years building and refining a playbook for this exact type of digital takedown.
They've essentially become a specialized spearhead for dismantling cybercrime-as-a-service infrastructure. They took the lessons from the booter domains in 2024, applied them to wrapper-bot in 2025, and scaled up to manage this massive 4-botnet disruption in 2026.
And they will undoubtedly need that refined playbook because the cybercrime ecosystem is a constant arms race.
Always evolving.
Right. When Isuru and Mossad are taken offline, the remaining operators analyze the takedown. They study the sinkhole techniques used by Cloudflare and AWS, they search for new UPnP vulnerabilities, and they build back more resilient networks.
It really makes you look at your own living room completely differently. We've gone through the physical mechanisms of a 30 terabit attack, the cybercrime rental market, firewall vulnerabilities, and this massive global alliance. But the through line connecting all of this, from the German hackers to the U.S. military, is the hardware sitting on your desk.
It is.
The perimeter of international conflict is no longer a physical border wall or military base. The front line is the everyday technology we bring into our homes for convenience.
And it demands a fundamental reassessment of how we view digital responsibility. We are accustomed to relying on the government and the military to handle national security threats.
Right.
But if cheap, unpatched home appliances can be silently grouped together to successfully launch a strike against the U.S. Department of Defense's own infrastructure, we have to ask a very uncomfortable question.
Which is?
Does this mean the responsibility for national security is permanently shifting? Are we moving away from a world protected solely by specialized military units and instead placing a massive burden directly onto the shoulders of the average consumer buying a $20 webcam?
Wow. That is definitely something to think about.
Oh.
Well, thank you for joining us as we unpack the mechanics of this fascinating global operation. We'll be back soon to explore the next set of sources shaping our world. Until then, take a second look at your router, update your passwords, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.